The Russian military's most closely guarded secrets have just been exposed thanks to the discovery of a manuscript. The Kremlin is in a state of panic because of this notebook that was taken from a Russian. This notebook is currently being examined by Ukrainian intelligence. Then what exactly was written in this notebook? Why is it so essential to have this notebook? Is it possible for a notebook to alter the way a conflict? Turns out, let's get underway. The Russian army was forced to. The Russian military was making rapid progress toward its invasion of Ukraine. The Russian force was incapable of keeping control over the occupied territories after they had taken them. The Ukrainian force was conducting a strategic withdrawal at the time the Russian force was successful in pushing forward all the way to the opposite bank of the Danube. After that, the Ukrainian army was in a position to obtain an offensive advantage that was strategically strong as a direct result of the actions that the Ukrainian army took. The Russian army was forced to withdraw while suffering significant casualties. The Russian military eventually pulled out of the majority of the captured territories. The Ukrainian force was successful in retaking a large number of towns and city centers. The Russian army has lost more than 150,000 soldiers as a result of these ongoing activities, who is being held in prison. Throughout these operations, the Ukrainian forces made a number of various astute maneuvers. The Russian army was rendered defenseless across many fronts as a result of the unexpected operations that were carried. Particularly, operations were carried out against Russian locations that housed ammunition depots, and the ammunition used by the Russian army was taken as a spoil of war. In addition to ammunition, the Russian sites contained a variety of other supplies for the Ukrainian military. These sites were searched, and a significant amount of information regarding the military strategies employed by the Russian army was. It was particularly interesting to learn that the Russian bases had prisons built into the basements of the buildings. Who exactly was held in custody within the Russian outposts? Various prisons. The criminal history documents revealed all Russia's goal was to establish its control over the occupied cities at the same. Every community that had been taken over by the occupiers got its own governor. And those governors immediately started issuing orders to the residents of Ukraine who were still there. The governor that had been nominated by Russia was ignored by no one, and his commands were not carried out. As a result of this, the governor of Russia requested that a number of people in the city, including the head of police and the mayor, be placed behind bars. The Russian military also kidnapped their families and took them hostage. Recognize my credibility, the Russian governor told the influential citizens of the city, and I will set you and your family free. However, these people who were kidnapped stated that they would not help the governor in any way. The identities of these individuals were located in the records that were discovered in. However, the vast majority of institutions were vacant. It is believed that Russian military were responsible for the deaths of these individuals. Documents discovered by Ukrainian soldiers revealed that Russian soldiers had committed war crimes. The crimes were documented. Russian commanders took particular note of how uncivilized and brutal the Wagner soldiers and Chechen soldiers were during. The documents documented a number of incidents, including assaults on Russian soldiers and rapes committed against these individuals. The Ukrainian army attacked Russian troops while the Russian army was making preparations to launch attacks on Ukrainian territory. To commemorate the anniversary of the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian army was carrying out a sequence of attacks against. Through a series of coordinated offensives, the Ukrainian army was successful in destroying key Russian strongholds. The commemoration of the war's anniversary resulted in a ratcheting up of the fighting and an increase in the number of casualties suffered by the Russian occupants. The Russian army suffered the loss of more than 1,000 personnel, dozens of tanks, and tons of equipment in just 2 days. It is abundantly obvious that the Ukrainian armed forces place a high priority on significant events such as New Year's Day 2023. In light of these attacks and the spectacular operations that were carried out by the Ukrainian army on that day, the Russian army, which experienced losses of hundreds of soldiers and tons of ammunition in the regions of Machiai, Ika, and Zaporizhzhia in the first hours of 2023, suffered the same fate on the anniversary of that. Let's look into the specifics of these assaults together, shall we? 14 assaults were carried out by the Ukrainian forces. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine announced in a post that was dated February 24, 2023, the anniversary of the war, that they had carried out a total of 14 assaults on significant points belonging to the Russian. The post was dated the anniversary of the war. Although the General Staff did not disclose the regions where the attacks were carried out, it is estimated that these regions are the cities in Donetsk and Luhansk, which are currently in the midst of a conflict, because Russian invaders have been trying to take control of these regions for several months. But the Ukrainian army has been able to successfully defend itself and launch attacks against the Russian invaders, preventing them from achieving their objectives. According to a statement released by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, in one day, our aviation carried out 14 attacks on the areas where the invaders concentrated personnel and military equipment. Many thousands of Russian fighters were killed in action. The Russian invaders suffered significant casualties as a result of the strikes which targeted military personnel and equipment locations. It is common knowledge that the Russian force suffers from a severe lack of both personnel and equipment. The head of Wagner Group made a statement not too long ago in which he claimed that a shortage of weapons and ammunition caused him to lose hundreds of soldiers. In addition to that, images of the dead bodies of these warriors were disseminated across various social media platforms with careful planning and execution. The Ukrainian army struck once more in areas where the Russian invaders were expected to experience the greatest number of casualties. In the same statement, the Ukrainian General Staff mentioned that one of the Russian invaders' Mi-23 assault helicopters and one of their Lancet unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed by Ukrainian fire. The monster that Putin supports is about to destroy him. Do you recall the tale of the guy who was devoured by the monster he had created? There is a lot of overlap in the plots of Hollywood blockbuster. It is speculated from time to time that machines built by humans will one day overthrow humans as the dominant species. Russia is the setting for one of these incredible tales that is currently unfolding. A creature that Putin helped to create and nurture is about to bring Putin's downfall. The advancements taking place in Russia are truly remarkable. There are a lot of strange occurrences that have recently been mentioned, and today we were given very significant new information regarding the most recent development in the conflict involving Wagner and Putin. We would like to make a brief reminder before we share this information with our followers, so please bear with us if you're prepared. Let's speak about the most recent events that have taken place. Crisis with Wagner. In recent days, the crisis that has been brewing between the Russian government and the Wagner organization has reached a new level. The Kremlin is becoming increasingly tense as a result of these occurrences. Executives from Wagner and Russian administrators simply cannot get along with one another. In the past few days, the crisis has grown to such a magnitude that it is altering the path that the conflict will. Let's start from the commencement of the story in order to better comprehend what has transpired. The Wagner organization is actually organized in a way that is quite fascinating. Putin provided a significant amount of assistance in the process of establishing this organization. Yevgeny Prin, the head of the organization, and a very close friend of Vladimir Putin, was in charge of them. As a result of this procedure, their relationship with Putin has improved. The entirety of Russia discussed how close they had become. During this process, Prisco HN was even granted a new nickname. Putin's chief, Wagner's soldiers took the front against the Russian army. The orders of Russian commanders and generals are disregarded by the Wagner army soldier. He does not carry out their instructions. The instructions that are given to Wagner soldiers can only come from Wagner commanders. Because of this situation, the Russian army and the Wagner soldiers are forced to operate independently because it is physically impossible for the two heads of the dragon to move in unison. They must resort to biting one another. The Wagner soldiers are in charge of their own activity. The Russian army did not acknowledge the contribution of the Wagner army in their victory declaration despite the fact that the Wagner army had taken Sor on the other side. Wagner announced that they had captured Sor and that the Russian army was trying to claim its victories. He said that the Russian army was trying to claim their victories. Russia is currently unable to make progress because of the predicament involving the two-headed. The Wagner warriors are not issued firearms or ammunition by the Russian army during their service on the other side. Wagner participates in only a limited number of operations at this point. This is very encouraging information for Ukraine. At this point, the Wagner troops engaged in combat with the Russian forces. Russia's declaration on the situation and crime. The military of Ukraine is getting ready to initiate an operation to retake control of Crimea. The Russian government issued a declaration regarding this operation. Dmitry Peskov, a spokesperson for the Kremlin, gave a response to the statements made by Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Zelensky said, "We will take back Crimea and re-establish." Peskov stated that it is not possible for Ukraine to assume control of Crimea, and that Crimea is an integral part of Russia. It is not possible for Crimea to come under the control of Ukraine. Peskov said Crimea is an inseparable whole of Russia. In his statement regarding the European Union's 10th package of sanctions, which targets 121 individuals and organizations in Russia, Peskov said all this is of course absurd. Obviously, they include people who are unclear and who have nothing to do with the sanctions issue in order to create the sanctions list. On the other hand, there are successful people on the list. The inclusion of these people in the sanctions list does not bother them. Obviously, the number of people targeted by this package of sanctions has decreased. 14 helicopters are shipped from Croatia to Ukraine. Croatia, a member state of the European Union, has initiated the arrangements necessary to deliver 14 helicopters to. It was reported in the Croatian newspaper JG List, which is considered to be one of the most influential in the country. that preparations have begun to transport 14 helicopters of the Croatian armed forces to Ukraine, and that the country will send 12 helicopters of the type Mi-8, MTV-1, and 2 helicopters of the type Mi-8T. These helicopters will be sent to Ukraine given the required maintenance on the helicopters will have been completed in their hangars, and they will be available to fly within the next 10 days. It is expected that the helicopters will be transported to Poland first, followed by Ukraine. During this time, the Croatian government continued to keep its assistance for Ukraine's military a secret, despite the fact that Prime Minister Andrej J. Plenković revealed in November that 14 helicopters would be sent to. In response to a question about how he felt about the situation, President Zoran Milović responded, "I don't care." Milović is well known for his opposition to the idea of providing military aid to Ukraine. The Ukrainian military fired down 300 Russian A Russian military aircraft was brought down by the Ukrainian military forces near Avdiivka. As a result, an invasion force into Russia was responsible for the downing of a total of 300 Russian aircraft in a video greeting that was shared online. On February 26, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed gratitude to the Ukrainian armed forces for bringing down the air. According to a statement that was released on February 26, 2023, by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Russia has lost a total of 300 airplanes since the beginning of the invasion attempt 1 year ago. According to a report made by the Ukrainian General Staff on February 26, 2023, Russian forces made extensive use of tactical aircraft in the area surrounding Avdiivka and other towns located within the city of Dan. The Ukrainian army suffered losses of 148,690 soldiers, 6,621 armored combat vehicles, 3,385 tanks, and 2,048 unmanned aerial vehicles. As a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine during their conflict, insurgents from Belarus launched an assault on Russia, which resulted in the Russian military aircraft was rendered useless as a result of the explosion that took place at the airfield in Belarus. There were explosions at the military airfield in Mali, which is located about 12 kilometers from Minsk, the capital city of Belarus. The Buy-Resistance movement released a statement claiming that 2 explosions at the airport caused damage to a Russian A-50 Shell-type airborne early warning and control air. The statement also claimed that the damage was caused by the explosions. It was reported that an unmanned aerial vehicle was used in the assault on the airport that was carried out by insurgents from Belarus. It was reported that in the aftermath of the explosion, a large number of police officers and military converged on the airport. It was reported that the authorities stopped and checked all vehicles that passed within a certain distance of. There have been explosions on Russian bases in the most recent months. There have been multiple explosions that have taken place at Russian military sites, at the sites in Kursk, RZA, and Engels. Reports of explosions were received. Rob Nako, an oil and gas tycoon, was discovered deceased in Russia. It was discovered that Vasily Nako, one of Russia's wealthiest rulers and the son-in-law of Boris Yeltsin, had passed away in his residence in Moscow on the Rubai Highway in Moscow. Rob Niko's body was discovered inside of his house where he had been living. Vasily Nako is now the 8th oil and gas tycoon and the 11th Russian top corporate executive to be discovered dead under suspicious circumstances since the beginning of the year 2020. Rob Nako was not only the founder of Euros Energy NV, but he was also a partner in an oil trading business headquartered in Belgium and a director of Fuel Uni. Both of these positions were held by Rob Nako. Battles are still being fought fiercely in Bakhmut and Aladar. The assaults carried out by Russian military continue. The most recent assertions indicate that Russian military personnel stepped up their assaults on 2. There is fighting in the cities for a period of 6 hours. It does this by dispatching additional forces to the areas of the 2 states where fighting is still going on. In the town of Aladar, the Ukrainian forces launched an assault on a Russian supply convoy. Mines were planted in the regions that the 120-vehicle convoy was going to travel through. When Russian battleships came in contact with explosives, explosions took. Next news. Do you recall the tale of the man who was devoured by the monster he had? There is a lot of overlap in the plots of Hollywood movies. It is speculated from time to time that robots built by humans will one day overthrow humans as the dominant species. One of these fantastic stories is actually taking place in Russia, and the monster that Putin helped to raise and nurture is on the verge of destroying him. The developments that are taking place in Russia are truly remarkable. There are a lot of strange occurrences that have recently been reported in the press, and God's Daily News pays close attention to all of the behind-the-scenes information regarding Russian politics. Today we were given very significant new information regarding the most recent development in the conflict involving Wagner and Putin. We would like to make a brief reminder before we share this information with our followers, so please bear with. The maintenance of an independent press is of utmost significance for the maintenance of peace and security throughout the entire world. Your support would mean a great deal to our team, which toils away at putting together the ATTP Daily News. You are able to show your support for our team by clicking the Super Thanks button that is located below the video. Please accept my thanks in advance. If you are prepared, let's talk about the most recent events that have taken place. The conflict that has been brewing between the Russian government and the Wagner Group has become significantly worse over the past few days. The Kremlin is becoming increasingly tense as a result of these events. In these final days, loan applications from Wagner executives and Russian bureaucrats have been. The magnitude of the crisis has increased to the point where it is altering the path that the war will take. Let's start from the beginning of the story in order to better comprehend what has transpired. The Wagner Group actually possesses a very intriguing organizational makeup. Putin provided the significant amount of assistance in the process of establishing this organization. Evgeny Preen, who was the head of the group and a close friend of Put, was in charge of the organization. As a result of this process, their relationship with Putin has improved. The entirety of Russia discussed how close they had become during this process. PRN was given a new nickname, Putin's Chief. The power held by Putin's chief lieutenant continued to grow in Russia. During the course of this process, the relationship between the Russian oligarchs and Prin received a substantial amount of financial support from the oligarchs. Prin, who held a significant amount of economic power, was also able to increase his influence over the Russian bureaucracy. And this process, in addition to this, he strengthened his relationships with the bureaucrats. He wields a significant amount of influence over the Russian bureaucracy. The Russian press was another outlet that took note of this. There were dozens of articles published in the Russian press about Prin and the Wagner Group. This matter was examined by a great number of specialists after Vladimir Putin. Prin is widely regarded as the most well-liked individual in Russia. PGA's meteoric rise through Russia's delicate political equilibrium for a loop after some time had passed. Prin and Putin began to have disagreements with one. The actions being taken by the Wagner Group were the primary factor contributing to this disagreement. The Wagner Group did not follow any rules, especially during times of war. The leaders of the Wagner Group were responsible for a great deal of trouble. The Russian commanders tried to give their orders to the soldiers of the Wagner Group, but the Wagner Group soldiers did not listen to them because they did not adhere to the Russian army's battle strategy. The Wagner Group was a consistent source of disruption to Russia's military operations. In addition to this, Prin, who was the director of the Wagner production, frequently discussed the war. On the other hand, it turned out that a lot of this information was false. The embankment was the source of the greatest concern in this regard. During the battle that was taking place in the rear, PRN made a statement in which he claimed that they had already captured. However, this information was not accurate. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense quickly disseminated a video that exposed the entire world to the facts of the situation. This video made it abundantly clear that the Ukrainian armed forces were not operating in a primitive manner. The fact that Ferguson had been lying all alone caused a great deal of disillusionment and was the target of criticism from a number of politicians who support Putin. Everyone was aware of the situation at this point. The Wagner Group was subjected to torture, which was another factor that contributed to this. Crisis executives from the Wagner Group have been known to torture soldiers who attempted to desert their posts. The publication of these images of torture sparked outrage all over. The majority of nations in the West are of the opinion that Wagner is a terrorist group. Wagner is facing severe punishment as a result of the sanctions that have been imposed. These sanctions are also having a significant and negative impact on the economy of Russia for Putin. The Wagner Group has become a significant source of. However, Putin is powerless to eliminate this group because the Russian military is currently in a precarious position on the battlefield. Putin has expressed interest in employing the Wagner Group soldiers, but doing so will not be simple. Today, the Russian soldiers and the mercenaries working for the Wagner Group are engaged in a never-ending battle with each other. The statements made by PR regarding this matter have caused a stir-in. While PRN was describing the issues that were occurring on the battlefield, he made some very harsh statements against the Russian commanders. He asserted that Russian commanders did not provide the Wagner Group with any weapons during their conflict. The following is what PRN said. The position of Chief of General Staff was va. The defense minister has been issuing orders left and right to ensure that the PMC Wagner not only does not receive ammunition, but also does not receive assistance with air transport. There is only open hostility being shown toward Wagner, which amounts to nothing less than an attempt to wipe him out completely. This is comparable to the most heinous form of Following the statement in which PGA leveled extremely harsh criticism against the Russian General Staff, everyone in Russia, with the exception of the Russians, waited for the government to issue a response. The government did not show much bravery. The statement that the supply of weapons to all of the teams that are working together with the Russian army is being done as quickly as possible was made by the Minister of Defense in a statement that was. However, those who support Putin were incensed. They wanted Wagner removed from the situation as quickly as possible. Proposers and propagandists, in addition to members of the Russian press, made numerous calls for this, but Putin did not dare. Putin is powerless to stop Prick, who is constantly putting Russia in a difficult position and challenging him. This is true for two different reasons. To begin, the overall condition of the Russian army on the battlefield is very dismal. At the moment, there have been approximately 150,000 deaths among Russian military service members. A significant number of the Russian soldiers either capitulated or fled the battlefield. Additionally, as a result of Putin's decision to send 300,000 soldiers to the front after the mobilization decision was made, Russian soldiers have a significant lack of battlefield experience. However, it is common knowledge that the training that these soldiers receive is severely lacking. There is a significant issue with a lack of discipline in the Russian armed forces. It is no longer within the capabilities of the Russian army to initiate any new offensives in any region. Putin does not trust Russian soldiers in order to carry on with this war. He needs the Wagner Group. If Russia loses the soldiers who make up the Wagner Group, they will not be able to win this war. Putin places a greater emphasis on the second of these reasons. Because Putin wields such significant influence, Putin is reluctant to engage in a conflict with him. If Putin were to purchase the Wagner Group, it could throw Russia's political system into complete disarray. During this period of chaos, it is anticipated that a large number of senior bureaucrats will take action against Putin. Ferguson is also on good terms with a large number of the most senior commanders in the Russian. There is a possibility that those who support PGA will stage a coup against Putin. Putin does not possess the necessary political authority to take any action against the Wagner Group. Putin is powerless to effect change in Russia at this point. All of Putin's schemes have been thwarted as a direct result of the effective defense provided by the Ukrainian army. At this point, all Putin cares about is retaining his. But these tensions in Russia show that Putin's political power is over. Many experts claim that Putin has reached the end of his political career. It is the end of the road for Putin, who has ruled Russia for nearly 25 years. Putin was aiming to expand Russia's borders by invading Ukraine. But now Putin's political career is over and Russia is about to fall. There is not a single piece of good news for Putin and Russia, which is experiencing the greatest political uncertainty in history. What do you think about this major crisis that Russia is going through? What could happen as a result of this crisis? Do you think the Wagner Group is a terrorist organization? Do you think the Western sanctions against the Wagner Group in Russia are enough? How do you think the Wagner Group is affecting the course of this? Please enlighten us with your thoughts. Keep up with us here for further updates. Every Right Studies video can be found on YouTube's App Daily News channel. There is no need to rely on any other social media publications. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook usernames are all listed on the @Daily News. We take legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. In the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, there have been significant new developments. The disgrace that has befallen Vladimir Putin is well deserved. The Wagner mercenary army manager has completely lost his mind as a result of the fact that the Russian army is unsuccessful and incompetent in everything. He also confronted the head of Russian intelligence, Valery Korino, as well as Yevgeny Prochin with this situation, which added to the confusion that already existed within the Russian army. The challenge that they are up against. Valery Gyov, the head of Russian intelligence, has never been able to provide adequate intelligence, which is one of the reasons why the situation caused him to become enraged once. He stated that our soldiers are not easily replaceable soldiers. He made a dramatic exit by stating that the war between Russia and Ukraine continues unabated, and that there have been clashes and operations, namely the most recent operation that was conducted by Ukraine. It was successful in rendering hundreds of Russian soldiers inept. The expansion of the amount of intelligence entering Ukraine, the training received by armies that are more knowledgeable and experienced than regular soldiers has enabled the Ukraine to achieve great success in the operations that it conducts. This training has not just recently been received by the Ukraine. One of those things when the war was almost at its most intense, was more professional and required more memorization than the operations that came. What was it about this operation that captured everyone's attention? What did Wagner's troops do before they abandoned their positions and ran away without looking back? The flight of this Wagner unit altogether acting unrelated to the actions of the Russian military. The most recent operation has driven Putin completely. The number of people in the Kremlin who are considering a couple of issues that have been on the agenda of other countries has been steadily growing. It is safe to assume that Yevgeny, the president of the Wagner Union, who has demonstrated that a couple is not too far away with the stringent actions they have recently implemented, is considering a coup. These actions have shown that a couple is not far away as a means of providing it. Vladimir Putin, who desired to take action, signed the new decree using the name of it as common knowledge. Anti-Cop Commissioner that every high-ranking member of the military who voted in favor of this resolution is an ardent supporter of Putin. The elevated authority that Putin has granted to high-ranking military personnel who are loyal to him has stirred up a significant amount of controversy within Russian politics in his efforts to enter domestic politics. However, the Afghan, who is also the founder of the Wagner Union, has recently focused his attention on the region that belongs to Sergei Su. This was done in conjunction with the establishment of the anti-cop. As can be seen, information suggests that Yevgeny's primary objective is related to the establishment of this commission, along with his desire to share that throne with Vladimir Putin and take it for him. This theory is supported by the fact that Yevgeny has been very secretive about his plans. It would appear that the purpose of this significant increase in the powers of high-ranking soldiers who are members of the Anti-Cop Commission is to ensure that soldiers who are opposed to Putin are unable to move closer to the cop. Janine Precaution, the founder of the Wagner Union, was recently shown to have participated in a meeting that was kept secret from Sir. It is believed that the main purpose of this meeting, which will take place in a region close to the border with Ukraine, will be to make plans for how they can depose Vladimir Putin from his throne. It is believed that this is why Sergei Slovakian was fired, who fired Wagner immediately after the disclosure of this meeting, and Wagner's statements and steps he will take in the coming were the subject of curiosity. He said that they achieved a great deal of success, thanks to a great deal of intelligence that Bayraktar reported. It is well known that Ukraine was successful in the most recent operation. However, it would appear that the intelligence provided by UAVs in many locations rather than by intelligence units in the most recent time period was much more successful in advance, worse than it ever has been. In the Soldier region, a Russian military cargo was the subject of intelligence gathering and an operation, both of which were carried out. The annexation of Russia is next on the agenda. It was reported that the newly acquired intelligence contained information regarding the location of the military. The capture of headquarters was made possible by unmanned aerial vehicles, and the operation required only a dozen Ukrainian soldiers to be successful in its conclusion. This is the evidence that demonstrates how far behind Western intelligence the Russian government is. It is common knowledge that the type of operation was carried out as an ambush assault on Ukrainian soldiers stationed at the military head. It is common knowledge that Russian soldiers are stationed to wait at the points where the guards change and that they encircle the headquarters each time. The guards change while this is going on. The fact that another explosion was staged by Ukrainian soldiers close to the soldier in order to facilitate entry into the headquarters and divert the attention of the guards there. The professionally sound strategy that Ukraine has put into action revolves around. Ukrainian forces reportedly neutralized many Russian elements with a raid on the headquarters in preparation for retaliation by the Russians in an effort to exacerbate the panic that was caused by the explosion of Russian soldiers. This was done in an effort to exacerbate the panic that was caused by the explosion of Russian soldiers. It is common knowledge that Ukraine has not suffered any casualties among its states and the flawless strategy behind the operation that it has put in place. The following is an explanation of each step that was taken during the operation that was being carried out. Every single word of the military headquarters in SODAR had a remotely controllable label of C4 explosives placed on it. After this stage, the C4 placement plan was placed not only on, but also on vehicles connected to the military that were positioned all around the military headquarters. The Ukrainian army was able to plant C4 in the various areas where they changed their position and headed at the appropriate time thanks to this maneuver, which allowed them to head in the direction they needed to go at the right time. Whenever there is a change in security, a C4 explosion is set off throughout the entire headquarters. At first, it was reported that an explosion had occurred in a different array of Sodar while Russian troops were preparing to assist due to the magnitude of the explosion. At the same time, Ukrainian forces had their vehicles outside and 2 armored vehicles were detonated by Ukrainian forces. The headquarters, which was surrounded, was the target of the attack as a result of the Russian soldiers' inability to decide what action to. Every single one who ventured outside was eliminated almost immediately after that, for remotely controlled explosives that had been attached to the walls of the headquarters went off simultaneously with the explosion. Soldiers from Ukraine had done so at that point and entered the headquarters. He neutralized the Russian soldiers, most of whom were unaware of what had even taken place at this point. The thing that caught people's attention was the fact that the soldiers who attacked the Wagner unit did not cause it to suffer any significant damage. It was one in which the Wagner soldiers had dug a trench for themselves and concealed themselves there, acting as if they were aware of the split in the ranks. This discovery, which was made in a relatively short amount of time, figuratively embarrassed the Russian. The fact that Putin decided to hold an emergency meeting without any delay drew a lot of attention to the situation. It ended up working out that way. Putin had given orders for the attack that was going to be planned in order to cover up this disgrace. He had also given orders for the attack on areas of Ukraine where there are more civilian. It was reported that the Russian forces that launched the counterattack evacuated the targeted area before the attack took place. Thanks to Ukraine's advanced intelligence network, the Russian invaders were unable to cause any damage to the territory they occupied in Ukraine. This most recent action taken by Ukraine has caused a ripple effect throughout the WordPress sea. Those forces that helped us determine which side was clearly victorious in the war. Russia continues to maintain its presence in Ukraine as if it wants to add another humiliation to the ones it has already suffered. As a result of this process, it is believed that Ukraine, which has significantly strengthened itself thanks to the assistance and strategic information received by the Ukrainian army, will continue to humiliate the Russian forces. This belief is based on the fact that Ukraine has greatly strengthened itself. Unbelievable action taken by the common people against Putin. The Ukrainian people were united in their opposition to Putin's invasion of their country. Putin's shame was brought to light once more as a result of the trap that Ukrainian peasants set for the invading Russian forces. What can the Russian, which cannot even win a battle against the population at large, possibly due to the brave Ukrainian soldiers in the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia? One unexpected turn of events followed another. An extensive ambush was set up by the Ukrainian people against the army of Russia. The unexpected move ended up costing the Russian army a significant amount of. This setback for Putin, which comes at a time when the occupation is going so poorly, has caused the Kremlin to go on high alert. When the press from around the world saw the resistance put up by Ukrainian peasants, they were literally shocked on Ukrainian soil. Russia had nowhere to hide, so the country is now counting down the days until it can carry out his ultimate plan of action. Recent events have placed Russia in a very difficult situ. The Ukrainian military has had a string of successes that have gradually reduced the strength of the Russian military. The Russians, having come to the conclusion that they could not win the war, made their move to capture a strategic village close to Donetsk. However, the Ukrainian army, which had been functioning in a very organized manner for a considerable amount of time, did not permit this to. Something unanticipated took place despite the fact that the Ukrainian army had moved to defend that area. An unexpected blow was dealt by the people of the Ukrainian resistance. Now onto the Russian military personnel. The Russian army immediately began collecting the necessary intelligence in order to take control of a village close to Donetsk. The Russian army believed that because the Ukrainian army had just recently held its troops in Sore embankment, this operation would be relatively simple to complete. However, the Russian army was not successful in achieving its goal. The villagers were then informed that the Russian army would soon be arriving to invite them. They devised a sound strategy to achieve their goals. Thanks to the network they used to communicate with the Ukrainian, they were able to get some weapons and ammunition support, but the possibilities were very limited. The Ukrainian army, which had refused to surrender in any previous form, had moved all of its ammunition and equipment to that particular region, but the Ukrainian peasants did not despair in the slightest, which caused some explosions, a dozen guns. They did nothing but wait for the Russians to show up day after. A hasty reconnaissance mission was put into action. They waited for the occupation of the village that was located in front of them as a signal that the Russian army was getting closer. They had a general idea of what the Russian invaders were planning to accomplish in the villages, and as a result, everyone was prepared to give up their lives. Russia did not have a chance against such a well-organized community of believers when they faced off against each. Then 20 kilometers away, Russian troops occupied a village. Ukrainian villagers mobilized. They waited after planting a large number of explosives that were controlled remotely under the bridge that went over the river. The Russian army dispatched a battalion of troops to prepare for an offensive, under the impression that it would be a straightforward opera. However, Ukrainian peasants also organized for an unexpected form of resistance, and ever since the conflict's outset, they have demonstrated an outstanding level of performance that will earn them a place of distinction in both history and the Hall of Fame. As the Russians got closer and closer, the Ukrainian peasants waited for the slightest sign of movement to bail lives. They watched as the Russian soldiers crossed the bridge one step at a time. And then they detonated a massive bomb on the bridge before even half of the Russian soldiers had reached this side. Almost immediately after this, the explosions caused the river to become flooded, and a great number of Russian soldiers drowned. Villagers from Ukraine began firing their weapons at the Russian troops that were still present from the side of the village. Immediately after this exchange of fire, the Russians moved in. The Russians, who had lost their positions in mutual fighting, had almost no chance of winning because the Ukrainian peasants had taken such strong positions that they were bringing the Russians down one by one. When the Russians came to realize They attempted to retreat, however. They were forced to surrender to the Ukrainian peasants almost immediately after this incident. The Russians who were captured handed over the weapons and explosives that were discovered in this area. It is obvious that if the Russian soldiers make another attempt to enter this village, they will face a formidable obstacle in the form of the villagers' defenses. However, it is also important to note that in the aftermath of this, Ukrainian troops provided a significant amount of ammunition and weapons to the local resistance movement in that region. Because of this, every one of the Ukrainians in the area insurgents mustered their forces in order to defend the territory they control. The fact that this mobilization was done on a volunteer basis makes it abundantly clear that the Ukraine did not struggle with even the slightest degree of disorganization throughout. According to those who study wars and conflicts, this conflict illuminated the distinctions between the Russian army and the Ukrainian army in a manner that is entirely serious. Faith is something that every single Ukrainian possesses. This belief is founded on the aspiration of its adherents to safeguard their nation. On the other hand, the Russians are doing everything they can to maintain an occupation that isn't just. And because they are conscious of this fact, the psychology of guilt prevents them from working to their full potential. This alone is sufficient to create the conditions necessary for Russia to suffer a series of defeats in the war. There is not a single member of the Russian armed forces who enlisted on their own volition. This clarifies a lot of the confusion that has been going on within the army following the overnight issuance of the Ryle Order in. Everyone in Russia who was capable of fighting was dispatched to Ukraine. It was explained to their families that in the event that one of their relatives passed away, they would be entitled to 5 million in bubbles. However, the testimonies of family members of those who have perished while serving in the Russian armed forces demonstrate that this is not at all the case since the beginning of. The Russian army has grown to include nearly 150,000 soldiers. This is an extremely large number. Because he has thrown the country into such a severe economic crisis, Putin is unable to compensate any of their families for their financial losses. The people are going through a great deal of anguish as a result of. People who were already without work as a result of the crisis have even found work in an entirely new industry because of the high number of casualties sustained by the Russian armed forces. Grave diggers are the most in-demand professionals in Russia right now because of the crisis in the sector. The number of people without jobs in Russia is steadily rising. Day after, despite Putin's assertions that the economy is holding steady, Russia's budget deficit continues to widen on a monthly basis, which sends a message to the rest of the world that the country's economy is in decline. There are very credible experts who predict that Russia will totally disintegrate by the end of this year. There is only one primary offender to blame: Putin, who hasn't been able to regain the public's trust since he mismanaged the course of it, is destroying even the tiniest possibility this time around. This is a huge mistake on his part. As a result of experiencing the worst possible effects of the war, the Russian people are eager for Putin to step down from his position as leader. It is widely believed that the Russian military has planned an operation to rid the area of the occupying forces in exchange for the local people. The advantages that Ukraine now possesses are a result of its previous disadvantages. However, Russia is also carrying out a retaliation operation. And the objective of this operation is to first completely occupy Ukraine and then launch an assault on the countries that are located in the region. These nations are Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Moldova. However, Putin's plans involve much more than just these four. After Russia has taken control of Ukraine, Ukrainian intelligence has learned that Russia will launch missiles at Germany and Britain in response to the news that it has done so. The government is responsible for bringing weapons into Ukraine. While this news managed to throw the entire world into disarray, it remained unclear whether Vladimir Putin intended to start World War III in order to maintain his current level. Many NATO countries expressed their concern about the possibility of a third world war by requesting that all aid to Ukraine be stopped immediately and adding that if this request was not met, they would reevaluate their partnership with NATO. On the other hand, Ukraine has started to approach the situation in an uneasy manner, which has provided the worried Ukrainian leadership with a sense of relief that the United States has consistently been on. But in the wake of these events, it is now believed that Ukraine should put an end to the conflict instead of the United States. The most important reason for this is that despite the fact that Ukraine makes beneficial use of the time, it was discovered that Russia made significant preparations in response to this. Even though this demonstrates that the direction the war is taking can shift at any time, it is said that it is impossible for Russia to go back to the way things were unless this administration, which has been unsuccessful, is replaced.